Welcome everyone to Module 3 of Coping Skills, Emotional Regulation. This module is all about emotions, why we have them, how they're formed, and how emotions can be directly tied to certain events. So I'm going to start you with this question. How many emotions do you think we have? Now, if you said that we only have a few emotions or that we have dozens, even hundreds, you're all correct. It really depends on who you ask. But it is true that humans can experience a wide range of different emotions, from dozens to even hundreds. But what we're going to do in this video is we're going to take all these very complex, intricate emotions that you might experience and break them down into 6 categories. So I'm going to give you the first of these 6, happiness. I want you to see how many of the other 5 emotions you can name in this next question. Alright, so along with happiness, the 6 emotions are happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, and disgust. Those are the 6 that we're going to be discussing throughout this module. And what we're going to be using is this. This is known as the emotion wheel. And basically the way it works is it takes that vast quantity of different emotions we can experience and funnels them down into the 6. So you might look at a more complex emotion like furious and automatically know that its root is anger. But an emotion like awe, which is that kind of complex, wonderful feeling when you see something so beautiful they can't really describe it, where does that fall in? So this chart does a wonderful job of taking those complex emotions and boiling them down, that you can now see that awe is a kind of offshoot of surprise. So this is very important to understand, that even though we have a vast quantity of emotions, that they can kind of be boiled down into these 6. And this will be very helpful when we go on later on and want to discuss, well, if we have unwanted emotions, things that we don't want to experience, how can we use this wheel to help us? But it's also an amazing tool to kind of understand all the emotions out there. I really recommend that you take some time and read every single emotion on there. Last week in mindfulness, we discussed how important just putting a name on an emotion can be, how that's a great mindfulness tool. Well, it's critically important in regulating emotions. You have to be able to understand what feeling you're feeling at any given moment if you want to be able to properly handle that emotion. So take some time, read through these emotions. If you don't know what a word is, Google it and really learn so that you can start describing your emotions at any given time. Because if you can't describe it, you can't deal with it. You need to know what it is before you can handle it in a situation. Alright, so we're going to come back to the feelings wheel in a little bit. But I want to finish off this first video discussing, why do we have emotions in the first place? So there's a bunch of different reasons about why we have emotions, but it initially started as a means of survival. So if you think back, long before we even looked like this, fear would have been directly tied with the fight, flight, or freeze response. When you felt afraid, you would have these reactions happen in your body that would then give you the best chance of survival. The same sort of thing played a role with happiness. We get happy when we eat certain foods, salty, greasy, fatty foods, because typically in nature, those are hard to find. So if we get really, really happy when we find those foods, we're going to seek them out. And back before there was a McDonald's, finding those foods meant a really good chance of survival. Same sort of thing plays a role in love and reproduction. But as we evolved and become more complex, our emotions became more complex as well. So much of our psychology, the way our brain works, is directly linked with understanding other people, and emotions are a great way to do that. If we have shared feelings, we're going to be able to bond with people, we're going to be able to communicate better because we have a better sense of what somebody's going through. So in a nutshell, emotions were there to give us the best chance of survival, and as we got more complex, they got more complex as well. That's why we don't just have fear and joy. We have things like sadness and anger and awe and irate and all these complex emotions, because we are complex individuals. They allow us to communicate, to bond, to fall in love, and to survive. They're a critical part of the human experience. So like most things, it started simple and became more complex. And the last important reason about why we have emotions is they are directly linked to memories. Emotions can trigger certain memories, and certain memories can trigger certain emotions. And again, that's a critical thing for survival. Back when we were living in a harsher environment, if we ate some berries that weren't good for us, we would then have a cascade of physical responses as well as emotional responses. And then now we know not to eat that berry. We know that eating that berry causes a negative emotional and physical reaction. So again, critical for survival. But again, as we became more complex, as our world has changed and society developed, emotions can now be tied to things that aren't necessarily beneficial for our survival. In the moment, that emotion might have been tied to something beneficial, but now they can affect us negatively, and that's where mental health issues can come into play. And we're going to discuss that a little later on.